Something had shifted beneath humanity's feet, a subtle distortion almost too faint to notice at first. For years, faint tremors rippled through the Earth's crust, dismissed as mild earthquakes or inconsequential geological adjustments. But the real culprit was cosmic and viciously subtle. Days passed, weeks slipped by, and the pull of gravity grew heavier in increments so minuscule that few recognized the dire changes until it was too late. By the time scientists pieced together the data, society had already begun tearing itself apart. The early warning signs were mundane. Shoulders sagged from mild discomfort, ankles ached longer after a quick run, and children's backpack straps left bruises where there had been none. Then came the spikes of panic in emergency rooms, where doctors encountered record numbers of inexplicable fractures and muscular injury. Athletes collapsed mid-sprint, complaining of suffocating pressure they couldn't outrun. Scientists scrambled to understand how the same gravitational constant that had shaped life on Earth for millennia could increase so quickly. Some blamed electromagnetic anomalies, solar fluctuations, or cosmic waves. Others suspected human meddling with the planet's core, excessive drilling, nuclear tests, or clandestine experiments. The reality was that no single group or phenomenon provided a complete answer. All that truly mattered was that Earth's gravitational force was doubling, tripling, swiftly crushing everything that walked or flew. By the time the general public accepted the inevitability of the calamity, civilization had already begun collapsing under its own ponderous weight. On the day the first major city officially fell, Ada Harris could feel the new gravity in her lungs. Every breath took conscious effort, like trying to suck air through thick molasses. She struggled to walk down the deserted hallway of her apartment building, knees trembling, thighs burning. It felt as though invisible hands were pressing down on her shoulders. Doors in the corridor stood ajar. Neighbors had evacuated. The overhead lights flickered, electricity in a final push to keep flickering illusions of normalcy alive. She glanced toward her young son. Tristan was 8 years old, thin for his age, now stooped over like the world's weight was pressing on his small back. He clutched a tattered backpack that contained the last of their food supply. His eyes were fearful yet somehow resilient. Together they made their way outside, heading for the battered SUV that sat listing on flattened tires. It was battered not because of neglect. Ada had always taken care to maintain it, but because the increased weight had destroyed the car's suspension, crookedly compressing metal rims to the pavement. "Mom, can we even drive anymore?" Tristan asked, voice trembling. Ada placed a hand on the car's hood, leaning her entire body weight against it. A dull strain spread across her arms, like she was pushing against a stone wall. She knew the engine wouldn't start. Even if it did, the roads were a tangle of wreckage. "We'll walk," she said, though she expected that their journey would be more of a crawl. "Keep the backpack on your shoulders. Try to move steadily. We can't afford to rest too long in one place." They had heard rumors of an outpost beyond the city. Supposedly, a team of scientists with advanced labs was trying to develop specialized suits that could negate some of the crushing force, at least enough for people to move with less pain. The rumor might be false, of course. Countless stories had sprung up in the chaos, most unraveling under scrutiny. But rumor or not, Ada had no other lead. Across the street lay the remains of what had been a neighborhood grocery store. Its windows were smashed, shelves inside bare. The sign overhead dangled precariously, half broken and swaying just an inch from collapse. A stench of expired food drifted on the stale air. Not that anyone had the energy to riot anymore. The riotous looting had happened months ago, before the simplest act of rising from bed became a Herculean feat. "Mom!" Tristan's voice caught in his throat, alarmed. He pointed toward a motionless body slumped next to the store's entrance. The battered shape had once been a woman, perhaps in her 40s, pinned to the ground by her own backpack. A sense of despair roiled in Ada's stomach as she quietly gripped Tristan's hand and looked away. They had grown used to such scenes, but that didn't lessen the pity, or the fear of someday ending just like that. Once they would have crossed the distance in under a minute, but now each step was laborious. Their progress was measured in yards per minute. The gravitational onslaught sapped every vestige of strength. Ada tried to focus on a single objective, reach the northern edge of the city, where new roads might offer better passage. In between ragged breaths, she silently prayed that the rumors of a scientific outpost were true. Eventually they heard a faint scraping behind them. Ada stopped, heart pounding. She turned with immense effort and saw the silhouette of a man slowly approaching. He wore a thick jacket that had once been white, now streaked with grime. Pressing on the hood of a burned-out car, he advanced in uneven, painful steps. Ada instinctively tightened her grip on Tristan's hand, prepared to fight or flee, though she hardly had the strength for either. "Wait," the stranger rasped, raising a trembling hand in greeting. "I'm not here to hurt you." Ada warily watched him. The man looked exhausted, but alert. His unkempt hair was plastered to his forehead, and his cheeks were sunken. Their eyes met in a silent understanding of shared struggle. "I'm Simon," he panted. "I've got a working vehicle nearby. You two look like you could use a ride." He let out a shaky laugh that ended in a painful cough. "Well, working is generous. It's a solar card I've modified with some magnets. It's not perfect, but it moves. For now." "Really?" Hope flickered in Ada's voice. She and Tristan exchanged glances. A ride meant covering ground far faster than on foot. Simon gestured behind him, where, on the far side of the block, a contraption rested on the pavement. It resembled a golf cart, fused with scraps of metal plating and what looked like large electromagnets installed along the undercarriage. A solar panel was leaned against the side, half cracked. The tires, though deflated, seemed partially suspended by the magnets, reducing the friction. Ada caught her breath in astonishment. Even a jerry-rigged contraption could mean salvation. She studied him carefully. "How far can it take us?" "Maybe a dozen miles before the battery runs out," Simon replied. "But we can recharge the battery if there's enough sunlight." He winced, pressing a hand to his spine. "Listen, I heard about a lab north of here near the old highway. I plan to head that way." She nodded, her caution tempered by desperation. "We're headed north too." Simon gave a weak smile. "Then let's pool our resources." He guided them toward the solar cart, each step deliberate and draining. After helping Tristan climb in, Ada settled herself in a makeshift seat. Simon took the front, fumbling with a tangle of wires until the machine hummed quietly. A surge of faint electromagnetic repulsion lifted some weight off the cart's axles, compensating for the relentless pull. The cart jerked forward, rattling. A half-mile per hour never felt so fast or so liberating. As they slowly rolled through the streets, Ada saw more of the city's desolation. Buildings were collapsed or on the verge of collapsing, entire infrastructures buckling under the new gravitational load. Pavement was ripped, metal beams twisted like they were made of putty. The city that once teemed with life and motion now looked as though some giant child had stepped on it. In the distance, the horizon was indistinct, blurred by haze and smog. Birds no longer flew in the skies. They had fallen from the air as gravity intensified. Only the crows survived for a short while longer, cruelly feeding off carcasses until they too could not lift themselves. No one spoke much. The weight of survival was just as crushing as the gravity itself. Occasionally, Simon pointed out roadblocks, piles of debris, abandoned vehicles, or gaping fissures. They navigated around them, the cart trembling as the magnets fought to hover. Sometimes they heard muffled screams echoing from collapsed structures, but they lacked the means to help. Every attempt at rescue could spell death for them as well. Night began to fall, and with it came additional terror. As the sunlight receded, the solar battery in the cart lost efficiency. At last, the machine sputtered and ground to a halt beneath a half-collapsed overpass. Darkness settled around them, heavy with the knowledge that they had no safe shelters. Ada shivered under the evening's chill, though she could barely tell whether her trembling was from the cold or the weight pressing on her. "We should make camp," Simon said, voice hushed. "Under the overpass," Tristan whispered. "What if it falls?" "It might," Simon admitted, "but I'm not sure we'll find anywhere safer before complete dark." Ada said nothing. She understood the bleak irony in resting beneath tons of concrete that could give at any moment, but they were all on their last threads of energy. Stepping off the cart was like stepping into a dense swamp. Her joints burned with the mere act of standing. She managed to retrieve a tarp from the back of the vehicle and spread it across a relatively even patch of pavement. The three huddled together, silent except for the occasional cough or groan. Sleep came intermittently. At some point during the night, Ada awoke with tears in her eyes. She found herself gasping for breath and realized that gravity had grown heavier still. Air pressed down on her lungs, making it almost impossible to expand them fully. In the gloom, she saw Simon stirring, sweat drenching his brow. Tristan slept fitfully, whimpering softly from night terrors or the relentless pressure. Determined not to succumb to despair, Ada steeled herself. Whether the outpost was real or myth, she had to keep going. Tristan's life depended on it, and she refused to give up. When morning came, dim and gray, the three travelers barely managed to stand. Gathering the solar panel, Simon angled it toward the sun, coaxing vital energy into the device. The machine whirred back to life. Albeit weakly, they resumed their excruciating crawl toward the rumored lab with lumps of fear in the pit of their stomachs. The roads were increasingly impassable, and the tangles of debris forced them into detours. Their progress slowed. With each blocked path adding precious minutes they were ill-equipped to spare. By midday, they glimpsed what might have been the outskirts of the research facility. Ancient barbed wire fences sagged around a small campus of crumbling concrete buildings. The place looked deserted, but faint lights flickered through the gunmetal windows. Encouraged, Simon guided the cart up to a large gate. It hung partly open, battered and twisted. They inched through. Within, the yard was littered with broken glass from overhead security lights. Scorch marks marred the walls. Despite the devastation, one building's entrance remained intact. As they neared, a short figure emerged, dressed in a ragged lab coat. The figure raised a trembling arm in greeting, and they noticed a battered mask covering her face. She pulled the mask aside carefully, revealing concerned, sharp features. "You made it," the scientist called out in a reedy voice that wavered with fatigue. "Quickly, come inside." She motioned toward the door. Her stance was stooped, like she'd been living under these conditions for far too long. Simon powered down the cart. Ada and Tristan struggled to exit, their limbs shaky and burning. The scientist hurried over, hooking her arm underneath Tristan's to help him walk. Inside, the building's interior was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale sweat. Hallways led to labs stuffed with cracked test tubes, half-consumed chemicals, and scrawled equations across dry erase boards. "I'm Dr. Mather," said the woman once they found a small lounge containing chairs reinforced with steel scaffolding. She gestured for the newcomers to sit. "Take a moment to catch your breath." They collapsed into the chairs. The relief was immediate, but only partial. The pressure on their chests persisted. "We heard rumors that you've been developing something to offset this." Ada motioned helplessly at the bleak surrounding. "Is that true?" Dr. Mather nodded. "We've been trying. A few of us left from the original project team remain, but resources are scarce. Our research suggests that localized gravitational fields can be partially negated or manipulated using strong electromagnetic pulses. Our prototypes are close, but they require stable power and certain superconductive materials that we can't easily source anymore." Simon's eyes lit up, ignoring the sweat trailing down his face. "I have some magnets rigged onto a solar cart. It's primitive, but it gave us enough lift to come here." He paused, swallowing hard. "If you can harness something like that on a larger scale, could it help everyone?" Mather bit her lip. "Possibly, but the power demands are immense, especially under these new gravitational conditions. We've experienced supply shortages since the meltdown of city power grids. We're running on backup generators and solar panels that barely sustain our life support equipment." She cast a glance at Tristan, whose trembling had not subsided. "We do have a small stock of exoskeleton suits. They're prototypes made for mobility research. They don't fix the breathing problem, but they reduce the load on your muscles. With some calibration, they could help you all." She gestured for them to follow her further down the corridor and led them into a sealed room with reinforced walls. Machines blinked and clanked softly, and 4 half-assembled exoskeleton frames stood in one corner. The contraptions looked heavy, Steel rods, hydraulic pistons, and wires weaving through a harness. Dr. Mather carefully lifted one, her thin arm shaking with the effort. Ada eyed the device skeptically. "You said it won't fix the breathing problem." "Not directly," Mather affirmed, "but at least it keeps you mobile. If you can move, you can gather resources, possibly find medical equipment that can help with oxygenation. We're also working on an internal respiratory assist device, but it's nowhere near ready." Simon staggered forward. He ran a hand over one exoskeleton's cold metal. "Let's try it." They spent the next few grueling hours adjusting the frames to fit. Mather attached multiple straps around their limbs and torsos, while hooking up a lightweight battery unit to each backplate. With the flick of a switch, motors hummed gently. All at once, the weight on legs and arms shifted, as if the suit carried some of the burden. It didn't help the crushing sensation in the chest, the labored inhalations, but at least taking a step forward no longer felt like hoisting an anvil. Tristan's suit was smaller, but no less complex. When it powered on, the boy's eyes widened in wonder. He walked in slow, mechanical steps that might have seemed comical in a different time. With each move, the exoskeleton whirred softly, providing mechanical leverage against Earth's unyielding grip. The relief was bittersweet. Extended use of the suits put strain on the battery packs, and it was unknown how long they would last. Yet even a temporary reprieve was worth celebrating. Ada took a few cautious steps around the lab, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time in months, walking felt almost natural. Yet outside the lab's thick walls, the world remained a hostile place. Resources were scarce, and the survivors inside the facility had no illusions that they could stay barricaded forever. Dr. Mather laid out her plan. The team needed key superconductors that weren't available in the lab's meager supply. Those materials could be found in the remains of a nearby university physics department. If they could salvage them, Mather believed they might complete a device that could locally manipulate gravitational fields enough to provide short-term relief or even a bubble of normal gravity. "We don't know if it'll work," the scientist admitted. "But if we do nothing, we're all doomed anyway." Entranced by the slim possibility of halting Earth's descent into a literal crushing tomb, Simon and Ada volunteered to attempt the salvage run. Tristan insisted on coming along, not wanting to be left behind in a fragile facility while his mother and their new ally risked everything. With exoskeletons strapped on, they prepared for the journey. The university campus was several miles away, and they ventured forth at dawn. The battered solar cart carried only limited additional equipment, a few days' worth of rations, extra battery packs, and some basic medical supplies. The world around them was in advanced stages of collapse. As they traversed the final stretch of the city, the sky took on a perpetual shade of hazy gray, starved of sunlight by dust clouds kicked up from relentless tectonic shifts. The exoskeletons whirred, but even their mechanical assistants struggled against the increasingly punishing environment. When they reached the campus, they discovered serious structural devastation. One building had caved in entirely, fallen sideways onto a row of shattered greenhouses. The physics wing, though partially intact, had most of its windows blown out. They guided the solar cart through the rubble, eventually parking near a side entrance. The doorway was wedged shut by twisted beams, forcing them to find another way in. They circled to a gaping hole in the wall where an entire section had crumbled inward. Beyond lay a pitch-black corridor. Simon activated a small LED flashlight attached to his exoskeleton's arm. Its faint beam cut through swirling dust. Fallen ceiling tiles littered the floor. Cabinets had overturned, their contents spilled in chaotic heaps. They navigated the maze of debris until they found a large storage room that might have once housed sensitive electronics. Shelves half collapsed under the oppressive gravity. Tristan spotted a toppled rack filled with metal cylinders and strange components with protective foil still clinging to them. Ada read the faded labels. Superconductor test samples. "This is what we need," she said quietly, carefully wresting a cylinder free from the rubble. Her exoskeleton strained, but metal and motors groaned to assist. The cylinder felt impossibly heavy despite the mechanical help. They loaded the cylinders and any other relevant scraps into a nylon bag strapped to Simon's back. Each new addition was heavier than the last, testing the exoskeleton's limits. Concrete dust choked the air, making every breath ragged and desperate. Abruptly, a tremor rattled the building. Fractures in the walls widened. Ada's heart froze. Another quake, more violent than those from months prior, rippled beneath their feet. Perhaps Earth was intensifying its fit of cosmic rage, or the building's foundations were simply giving out. Whatever the reason, chunks of debris rained down from above. A large piece of plaster and steel crashed onto the floor just inches away, sending shards of rubble clattering. "We need to move," Simon roared over the rumble. They sprinted as best they could, stumbling through the hallway while girders snapped overhead like gunshots. Tristan squeaked in fear, covering his head with his arms. The web of cracks in the ceiling advanced like a hungry spider. Debris pelted the exoskeletons, which groaned under the extra hits. A monstrous crash echoed behind them, sending up a plume of dust that nearly swallowed them whole. With frantic steps, they staggered back to the gap in the wall. The floor vibrated beneath them as though about to open up. Ada thrust Tristan forward first, and he scrambled over loose cement blocks. Simon and Ada followed, diving out just as a huge fragment of the ceiling crashed down. In a deafening roar, the corridor behind them vanished in swirling dust. They lay panting outside in the wrecked courtyard, shrouded in the ashen haze. A wave of relief washed over them, tempered by the realization that they had lost any chance of returning for more. But they had what they came for, the superconductors, and they still had the exoskeleton suits. Nearby, the solar cart remained upright, battered but intact. Simon helped Tristan stand, then yanked Ada to her feet. "Let's get these back to Dr. Mathor," he rasped. They loaded the salvage cylinders into the cart's storage compartment. The quake's aftershocks still rattled the ground. Buildings creaked in mortal agony, threatening to collapse at any moment. The trio did not wait. With an unsteady lurch, the solar cart jerked forward, carrying them away from the site. The return trip took the better part of the afternoon. The exoskeleton battery showed signs of depletion, and the cart's magnetic lift wavered with each mile. At one point, the entire city rumbled, as if Earth had decided to intensify the cosmic squeeze. Ada felt her lungs burn with renewed urgency, her breath stolen away. It was all she could do to clutch Tristan and stay upright. Night was falling when they finally reached the lab compound again. Dr. Mathor rushed outside at the sound of the cart's sputtering approach. She and the other staff carefully helped unload the materials, then hurried the newcomers into a reinforced workshop. The building groaned in protest, but it still stood, for now, working feverishly. Mathor and the remaining scientists tested each cylinder. The survivors in the lab watched with bated breath. Tristan clung to Ada's side and tried not to whimper. Hours ticked past in tense silence, punctuated only by the clang of metal parts and the beep of devices. Finally, Mathor stood up, sweat beading on her brow. "The superconductors appear to be in usable condition," she proclaimed, voice tight with hope. "We can integrate them into the field generator prototype. I can't promise a permanent solution, but if it works, we'll have a localized bubble of reduced gravity. Maybe within this facility, or at least a single room. It might offer some relief, and possibly buy us more time." A hush fell over the group. Relief accompanied the knowledge that time was still slipping away. Even if they managed to create a bubble of normal or near-normal gravity, the rest of the planet would remain an unforgiving realm. Were they merely delaying the inevitable? Simon placed a hand on Ada's shoulder. "Sometimes a delay is all we need to find the next step," he said, softly, as if reading her thoughts. They assisted where they could, though the technical details were beyond them. Dr. Mathor oversaw the installation. Superconductors carefully mounted onto a reinforced circular platform, wires running to a large battery array. The exoskeleton suits helped them move the heavy components, but their breaths remained short and labored. At last, near dawn, the device stood assembled. It resembled a ring of metal rods braced by a steel framework, humming quietly with potential energy. Everyone gathered at a cautious distance. Mathor flicked a series of switches in precise order. Lights on the superconductors glowed with an otherworldly hue, and the ring emitted a deep hum that vibrated through the floor. For a tense few seconds, nothing else happened. Then the air in the center of the ring shimmered. A column of faint blue light flickered into being, dancing like a haze of heat in the desert sun. Mather's breath hitched. "That's it, starting up," she whispered. She checked a monitor that displayed readouts of electromagnetic and gravitational measurements. "The field is taking shape." Simon gingerly stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the shimmering column. Everyone watched as his posture seemed to straighten. His exoskeleton whirred less strenuously. His eyes widened. "It's lighter. I can breathe easier in here," he said, voice trembling with awe. Ada urged Tristan forward. The boy took a step into the field and gasped. "Mom, it's better," he cried, tears springing to his eyes. "I can stand without feeling like I'm being crushed." Ada joined them, feeling an almost dreamlike sensation. She inhaled deeply, her lungs expanding in a way they hadn't for months. Outside the column, faint swirling dust indicated that gravity was still relentless. But here, in this narrow zone, existence felt closer to the old normal. Dr. Mather cautioned them. "It's using a tremendous amount of power. The entire grid might fail, but if we can refine it, maybe we can expand the field's radius." For now, they had carved out a sanctuary from the heavy hand of Earth, if only within a single room. As they stood there, marveling at something that felt like weightlessness in comparison to the outside world, none of them could forget the devastation waiting beyond these walls. The irreparable damage to Earth's ecosystem, infrastructure, and population weighed heavily on their minds. Yet the shimmering bubble of reduced gravity proved that humans could fight back against even the most crushing fate. It was not a perfect solution. Not yet. The device would likely burn out soon if they couldn't stabilize or power it adequately. But it was a beacon, an example of human resilience. So long as they drew breath, no matter how labored, they would continue to confront the planet's new tyranny of weight. Perhaps they would find a way to broaden this bubble, to shield entire cities, maybe even discover a permanent fix. Or perhaps they would fail. In either case, they would not yield quietly. For Ada, the moment solidified a single truth. Even when the world itself turned unforgiving, hope could still flourish in the narrowest crack. Holding her son's hand in that small oasis of lighter gravity, she realized that, despite the unrelenting force pressing down on humanity, their spirits were not crushed. They were still standing, still breathing, and that meant their fight was far from over.